Trapped in a rundown Chicago home that offers no sanctuary, orphan DR nurse Clara Hayes is forced to fend off the predatory advances of her Uncle Arthur while backed against the shower wall. Utterly abandoned by a complicit Aunt Martha and left crying out to her late parents in sheer desperation. At that exact moment, in the ruthless underbelly of the city, Dominic Russo is officially crowned the new dawn of the Russo Mafia family, immediately inciting a deadly shootout when he firmly refuses to expand their empire into the fentanyl trade and is brutally ambushed by a rival faction accusing him of patricide. Bleeding out in a desolate, rain-slicked alley from a grievous gunshot wound, the feared mob boss's violent world abruptly collides with Clara's when she stumbles upon his broken body. Driven by her unwavering instinct as a medical professional, she fearlessly ignores the imminent danger of his approaching enemies to dress his fatal wound. Captivated by the fierce, defiant angel kneeling in the blood and shadows to save a man she doesn't even know, Dominic makes a silent, ironclad vow as his men finally track him down. He will find this brave stranger, and whatever it takes, he will make her his wife. The blinding glare of surgical lights faded into the dim, heavy shadows of a secure underground clinic. Dominic Russo inhaled sharply. The fiery agony radiating from his abdomen was meant to paralyze a normal man, but Dominic was far from normal. As his senses sharpened, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled his lungs, violently replaced in his memory by the smell of rain, copper, and her. He clenched his fists, feeling the phantom pressure of her small, desperate hands pressing down on his bleeding flesh. His men had extracted him mere seconds after she slipped away into the torrential downpour. He had not caught her name. He had not heard her voice speak anything other than panicked reassurances. But he remembered the worn fabric of her hospital scrubs and the fierce, unyielding glow of her eyes. The steel door to his recovery room creaked open, admitting Leo, his most trusted enforcer. Leo looked at his newly crowned Don with a mixture of relief and deep respect. Before the enforcer could utter a single syllable of a status report, Dominic pushed himself up against the pillows, ignoring the agonizing pull of his fresh stitches. His torso was heavily bandaged, a stark white contrast against his dark, tattooed skin. "I do not care about the Morano faction right now," Dominic rasped, his voice a low, gravelly command that left no room for debate. "I want every camera, every informant, and every shadow in Chicago working on one single task." There was a woman in that alley. A nurse. She saved my life when she should have run. Leo nodded slowly, recognizing the dangerous, obsessive glint in his boss's dark eyes. "We will find her, boss. What are your orders when we do?" "You do not touch her," Dominic warned, his tone lethargic but laced with lethal intent. "You find out who she is, where she lives, and what she breathes. You bring that information only to me. Turn this city upside down if you must. I want my angel in scrubs found by the end of the week. I want to know her nightmares, and I want to know her dreams, because from this moment forward, they belong to me." Across the sprawling, neon-lit grid of Chicago, Clara Hayes pushed her exhausted body through the swinging doors of the emergency room. It had been 48 hours since the nightmare in the alley, and 36 hours since she had fled her uncle's house with nothing but a duffel bag and a terrified heartbeat. She was currently sleeping on a lumpy cot in the hospital break room, entirely consumed by the endless influx of trauma patients. The sterile, chaotic environment of the hospital was her only refuge. She scrubbed her pale hands at the sink, the cold water doing little to wash away the memory of the dying man she had saved. She had left him there when she heard the heavy footsteps of his approaching men, praying they were his allies and not his executioners. He had looked at her with a gaze so piercing it felt like he was branding her soul. She dried her hands and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Deep purple bags hung under her eyes. She was 30 years old, orphaned, practically homeless, and completely drained. Yet, she straightened her spine, forcing the vulnerability deep down into a locked box inside her chest. She had shifts to cover. She had a life to salvage. Clara stepped out into the hallway just as her cell phone vibrated in her scrub pocket. The screen flashed with the name of her boyfriend, Trent Lawson. A brief wave of hope washed over her. Maybe he was calling to offer a place to stay. Maybe he was calling to ask if she was safe. She swiped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. "Trent, I am so glad you called," Clara breathed out, leaning against the cold tiled wall. "You have no idea what kind of week I am having. I had to leave my Uncle Arthur's house. It is bad, Trent. He tried to force himself on me. I need a place to crash for a few days." A heavy sigh echoed through the receiver, a sound of profound inconvenience rather than concern. "Clara, babe, you know my apartment is a mess right now. I have that big real estate client coming into town tomorrow, and I cannot have any distractions. Besides, I thought you were just going to apologize to Arthur and smooth things over." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. The memory of her uncle cornering her in the bathroom made her skin crawl. "I cannot go back there, Trent." He crossed a line. "Well, maybe you misunderstood him." Trent deflected effortlessly, completely ignoring her quiet desperation. "Look, the real reason I am calling is that the lease on my luxury sedan is up, and I need to put down a deposit for the new model. Clients will not take me seriously if I show up in a cheap car. I know you just got paid. Can you transfer $3,000 to my account by tomorrow morning?" Clara felt a cold, hollow ache settle in her chest. She was sleeping in a hospital break room, running on empty, and the man who claimed to love her was only checking her pulse to see if her wallet was still breathing. He did not care about her trauma. "Trent, I do not have $3,000 to spare right now," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed exhaustion and sudden clarity. "I just told you I am basically homeless." "Come on, Clara, do not be so dramatic," Trent scoffed, his tone dripping with condescension. "You always make everything about you. I am trying to build our future here. Just figure it out, okay? I will call you later when you are in a better mood." The line went dead. Clara lowered the phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. The man she had spent the last 2 years with was a hollow shell, taking her warmth and leaving her freezing. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and walked back onto the ward, utterly alone, completely unaware that out in the dark, sprawling city, a predator of a different kind had already caught her scent, and he was coming to claim her. Leo stood before Dominic in the dimly lit study of the Russo estate. Exactly 5 days had passed since the night the sky bled rain and copper. Dominic was healing, his iron will forcing his traumatized body to knit together faster than any medical professional would deem possible. Leo stepped forward and placed a pristine white folder on the heavy mahogany desk. "Her name is Clara Hayes," Leo reported, his voice low and respectful. 30 years old. Emergency room nurse at Chicago General. Orphaned at the age of 10. She is currently estranged from her abusive relatives and living out of a duffel bag in the hospital break room. Dominic reached out, opening the folder with calculated slowness. A photograph of Clara in her faded blue scrubs stared back at him. She looked utterly exhausted, yet fiercely beautiful. A dark, possessive satisfaction curled deep within his chest, replacing the phantom ache of his gunshot wound. She was completely isolated. She had no one to protect her. "Prepare the cars," Dominic ordered softly, snapping the folder shut. "It is time to make a charitable donation." 2 hours later, the chaotic symphony of the emergency room at Chicago General halted the moment the heavy glass doors slid open. 6 men in tailored black suits entered first, their presence instantly suffocating the frantic energy of the trauma ward. Then came Dominic Russo. Even walking with a slight, measured stiffness from his abdominal injury, he radiated an absolute, terrifying authority. The hospital staff parted like the sea, dropping their clipboards and holding their breath. Dr. Harrison, the chief of medicine, was practically sweating through his lab coat as he rushed forward to greet the infamous billionaire. Dominic had just wired $10 million to the hospital foundation, effectively purchasing the unwavering loyalty of the entire board of directors in a single keystroke. Down in the chaotic trenches of the lower level, Clara was furiously wiping down a gurney when her floor supervisor grabbed her arm, her face pale and eyes wide with panic. Clara was abruptly pulled from her duties and escorted to the executive suites on the top floor. She pushed open the polished oak doors of the director's office, fully expecting a severe reprimand for sleeping in the staff quarters. Instead, her breath hitched, trapping the stale air in her lungs. Sitting comfortably in the plush leather chair opposite the hospital director was the man from the alley. His dark, calculating eyes locked onto hers with the terrifying intensity of an apex predator cornering its chosen prey. He was no longer the bleeding, broken ghost she had desperately stitched together in the shadows. He was a king holding court, surrounded by his lethal guards, exuding wealth and danger from every pore. Nurse Hayes, Dr. Harrison stammered, gesturing wildly with trembling hands. "This is Mr. Dominic Russo. He has just made an unprecedented financial contribution to our new pediatric wing. Mr. Russo requires ongoing outpatient care for a recent medical incident. He has specifically requested that you be reassigned as his exclusive, personal care nurse for the duration of his recovery." Clara stared at Dominic. He held her gaze, a faint, arrogant smirk playing on the corner of his lips. He was looking at her as if she was already his property. He was buying her time, her proximity, and ultimately, her life. The realization sent a spike of pure, unadulterated anger through her exhausted veins. "No," Clara said. The single syllable dropped into the silent, opulent room like a live grenade. Dr. Harrison choked on his own saliva, his eyes bulging. "Excuse me? Nurse Hayes, this is a direct administrative assignment. You will be compensated incredibly well for your time, and you will step into this role immediately." "I said no," Clara repeated, her voice steadying as she squared her shoulders, refusing to shrink under the crushing weight of Dominic's stare. She looked directly into the eyes of the mafia boss, actively choosing not to cower. "I am an emergency room trauma nurse. I do not do private concierge medicine for billionaires with scraped knees. My patients downstairs need me. People who are actually dying need me." Dominic leaned forward slowly, resting his forearms on his knees. The dangerous grace of his movement made the tiny hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand up in alarm. "I owe you my life, Clara," Dominic murmured, his deep voice sending a violent shiver straight down her spine. It was the first time he had spoken her name aloud, and it sounded exactly like a claim of ownership. "I simply want to ensure I am cared for by the very best hands in this city. Name your price." "My conscience is not for sale, Mr. Russo," Clara fired back, her chin lifting defiantly as her survival instincts screamed at her to flee. "And neither am I. I suggest you take your millions and hire someone who actually cares about your bank account. I have a 12-hour shift to finish." She turned on her heel and walked out of the office, slamming the heavy door behind her and leaving the hospital director hyperventilating in his chair. Behind her, she did not see the violent irritation she expected to provoke from the feared mafia don. Instead, a dark, consuming hunger ignited in Dominic Russo's eyes. Her fierce defiance was not a deterrent. It was the exact spark that sealed her fate, proving she was the only woman strong enough to stand by his side. Dominic Russo did not believe in brute force when psychological dismantling was far more effective. Clara walking out of the hospital director's office was not a defeat. It was an invitation to a much more intricate game. Sitting in the back of his armored limousine, he listened to Leo recite the pathetic details of Trent Lawson's existence. The real estate broker was a weak, greedy parasite clinging to Clara while simultaneously sleeping with his senior agency partner. Dominic smiled, a cold and terrifying expression that promised absolute ruin. If Clara refused to let go of her attachments, he would simply burn them to the ground and leave her with nowhere else to turn. 2 days later, Clara ended her grueling 14-hour shift with a heavy heart. Her phone buzzed with a message from Trent, asking her to come to a luxury penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The text claimed he had secured a massive deal and wanted to celebrate, adding that the door would be unlocked. Clara hesitated, but the desperate, lingering hope that she still had someone in this harsh city pushed her forward. She spent her last $20 on a cab, arriving at the opulent glass high-rise just as the sun dipped below the skyline. The door to the penthouse was indeed unlocked. Clara stepped inside the foyer, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of her worn sneakers. She called out his name, but the only response was a sharp, rhythmic thudding echoing from the master bedroom down the hall, accompanied by breathless moans. A signing knot twisted tight in her stomach. She forced her leaden legs to move, pushing the partially open bedroom door wide. The luxury suite was a mess of discarded expensive clothes. Tangled in the silk sheets was Trent, completely lost in the throes of passion with a blonde woman Clara instantly recognized as his managing director. Clara dropped her canvas bag. The dull thud hitting the floorboards caused the two figures to freeze. Trent scrambled backward, his face flushing violently as he pulled the sheet over his waist. He did not look ashamed. Instead, his features twisted into a mask of cruel irritation. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. 2 years of her life, her loyalty, and her meager savings poured into a man who was looking at her as if she were an insect interrupting his dinner. "What are you doing here, Clara?" Trent snapped, completely abandoning any pretense of guilt. The blonde woman beside him merely rolled her eyes and reached for a glass of wine. "You texted me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling before she ruthlessly forced it to steady. "You said you wanted to celebrate." "I did no such thing," Trent scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at her faded scrubs and her exhausted face with blatant disgust. "But since you are here, let us stop pretending. You are a drag, Clara. You are broke, you are homeless, and you are so obsessively rigid about your morals that it is suffocating. I need a partner who elevates me in this city. You cannot even afford to buy me dinner. You are nothing but a burden." Every cruel word struck her chest like a physical blow. The illusion of love shattered into a million jagged pieces, leaving her completely exposed and terrifyingly alone. She had no family, no home, and now no one to trust. She opened her mouth to speak, but the air was violently sucked out of the room. "She is worth more than your entire miserable existence." The deep, lethal baritone echoed from the shadows of the living room corridor. Clara gasped, spinning around. Dominic Rousseau stepped into the bedroom, moving with the terrifying elegance of a panther. 2 of his massive enforcers flanked the doorway, blocking any chance of escape. Dominic wore a bespoke black suit, his dark eyes fixed on Trent with a murderous intensity that made the temperature in the room drop to freezing. Trent turned a sickly shade of gray, recognizing the notorious Mafia Don instantly. He scrambled backward against the headboard, his arrogant bravado dissolving into pathetic, whimpering terror. "Mr. Rousseau, I did not know you were here. What are you doing in this apartment?" Dominic completely ignored the trembling man on the bed. He stopped right beside Clara, his presence a towering wall of dark, protective heat. He did not touch her, but his proximity felt like an iron shield wrapping around her battered spirit. 10 minutes ago, my holding company finalized the hostile takeover of your real estate firm, Trent, Dominic stated, his voice a smooth, deadly whisper. Your boss sitting next to you is terminated, effective immediately. As for you, you're bankrupt. Every bank in Chicago will freeze your assets by midnight. Every agency in the country has just received a massive dossier detailing your gross embezzlement of client funds. You will never work, rent, or breathe comfortably in this city ever again. Trent gasped, clutching his chest as if he had been shot. He looked wildly at his boss, who was now weeping into the pillows, her own lucrative career annihilated in a matter of seconds. Dominic finally turned his dark, consuming gaze down to Clara. She was staring at him, wide-eyed and breathless, realizing the terrifying extent of his power. He had orchestrated this entire nightmare just to expose the rot in her life, stripping away her last remaining illusion of safety. He had burned her world to ash, simply to prove that he was the only fire capable of keeping her warm. The heavy mahogany door of the penthouse clicked shut, sealing Trent and his ruined life inside a luxurious tomb of his own making. Clara walked down the long, opulent corridor, her worn sneakers completely silent against the thick carpet. Her chest felt entirely hollow, carved out by betrayal and the sudden, terrifying realization of her absolute isolation. She reached the private elevator at the end of the hall, her pale hands shaking violently as she pressed the call button. A dark, suffocating presence loomed right behind her. Dominic Russo stood close enough for her to feel the immense heat radiating from his chest, his bespoke dark suit whispering faintly as he shifted his weight. His two massive guards had vanished into the emergency stairwell, leaving the feared Mafia Don entirely alone with his chosen prey. "You sent that text message from his phone," Clara said, her voice sounding incredibly fragile in the vast, quiet space of the corridor. She did not turn around to face him. She kept her tear-filled eyes fixed strictly on the polished steel of the elevator doors. "I merely arranged for his front door to be unlocked and ensured you would arrive at the exact moment his true nature was on full display," Dominic replied, his deep baritone completely devoid of any guilt or remorse. "I do not apologize for showing you the absolute truth, Clara. He was a greedy parasite actively draining your life. I simply severed the cord." The elevator chimed loudly and the doors slid open. Clara stepped inside, leaning her exhausted back against the cold, mirrored wall. Dominic followed her, pressing the button for the underground parking garage. The descent was agonizingly slow. The silence between them was incredibly heavy, thick with unspoken tension and the terrifying reality of her new situation. "You have destroyed the only life I had left in the city," Clara whispered, fiercely fighting the burning tears threatening to spill over her eyelashes. Dominic turned his head, his dark, calculating gaze locking onto hers with a possessive intensity that made her breath hitch in her throat. "You call sleeping on a lumpy hospital cot a life? You call running in terror from an uncle who wants to sell you to the highest bidder a life? You are surviving on pathetic crumbs, Clara. I did not destroy your life. I cleared the toxic wreckage so I could build you a fortress." The elevator doors opened into a cavernous, dimly lit underground parking garage. A sleek, armored black limousine sat waiting in the shadows, the massive engine purring softly. Leo stood by the open rear passenger door, his broad posture rigid and highly respectful. Clara stepped out into the cool, damp air of the concrete garage, wrapping her thin arms tightly around her trembling frame. She looked toward the yawning darkness of the exit ramp leading up into the unforgiving, rain-soaked streets of Chicago. She had exactly $20 in her pocket. She had absolutely no family left to trust. She had no home to return to. If she walked up that steep concrete ramp, she would be completely vulnerable to the vicious predators of the city, including the abusive uncle who was actively hunting her down. Dominic stopped a few feet away from her, casually slipping his large hands into his trouser pockets. He looked at her with infinite, terrifying patience, resembling an apex predator fully aware that his intricate trap was already perfectly sprung. "This is your absolute reality right now, Clara," Dominic stated, his powerful voice echoing softly in the empty concrete space. "You have nothing. You have no one. You can walk up that ramp this very second. I will not lift a single finger to stop you. I will let you walk out into the freezing night with nothing but the faded scrubs on your back. You can try to hide from your uncle. You can try to survive the brutal streets entirely alone." He took a slow, deliberate step closer to her, his dark eyes burning straight into her battered soul. "Or," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly whisper that sent a violent shiver down her spine, "you can get into my car. You accept my absolute protection. You step into my world. The moment you cross that threshold, You will never have to worry about a single thing for the rest of your life. No one will ever dare to touch you. No one will ever disrespect you again. You will have everything you could ever possibly desire, but you will belong entirely to me." It was the ultimate, inescapable ultimatum. A golden cage or a concrete grave. Clara looked deep into the eyes of the ruthless Mafia Don. She saw terrifying violence and endless darkness, but she also saw a fierce, unwavering devotion that frightened her just as much as it undeniably drew her in. He was a monster, but he was offering to be her personal monster. A violent tremor shook her entire body. The crushing exhaustion of the past week, the trauma of the betrayal, and the sheer terror of her vulnerability finally crashed down heavily upon her shoulders. She was so incredibly tired of fighting the cruel world alone. Clara closed her eyes, letting a single, defeated tear slip down her pale cheek. She took a deep, shuddering breath, opened her eyes, and walked slowly past Dominic. She approached the waiting armored limousine and climbed into the luxurious, leather-scented interior without looking back. Dominic watched her complete surrender, a dark, triumphant satisfaction settling deep within his broad chest. He slid into the spacious seat beside her, the heavy armored door slamming shut with a resounding thud. It sounded exactly like the locking mechanism of an inescapable vault. The limousine glided smoothly out of the dark garage, blending seamlessly into the chaotic Chicago night. They drove in complete silence, ascending rapidly toward the sky once they reached his towering building. When the private elevator finally opened directly into the Russo penthouse, Clara stepped out into a sprawling, breathtaking palace of glass and black marble. The city lights glittered far below them, completely silent and infinitely distant. Leo stepped out of the elevator right behind them, inserting a solid steel key into a hidden digital panel on the wall. A heavy, metallic click echoed ominously through the massive living room as the primary security lockdown engaged. The golden cage had officially closed, and Clara Hayes was now entirely at the mercy of the most dangerous man in the city. The heavy metallic click of the security lockdown echoed through the vast living room, sealing Clara inside the glass fortress. She stood frozen on the black marble floor, clutching her canvas bag to her chest as if it could shield her from the terrifying reality of her choice. Dominic Russo unbuttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate grace, watching her panic with dark, calculating eyes. He stepped closer, the faint scent of expensive cologne and sheer power washing over her. He instructed her to follow him down the sprawling corridor. Clara obeyed, her legs feeling incredibly heavy. They passed rooms filled with modern art and cold, minimalist furniture. At the very end of the hall, Dominic stopped in front of a solid oak door. He reached out, turned the brass handle, and pushed it open, stepping aside to let her enter. Clara walked into the room, fully expecting to see a sterile, luxurious guest suite designed for visiting dignitaries. Instead, the breath was violently punched out of her lungs. She dropped her bag. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. She was standing in a perfect, horrifyingly accurate replica of her old bedroom. It was not just remarkably similar. It was an exact duplicate. The faded yellow floral wallpaper was perfectly matched, completely devoid of the water damage from her uncle's house. The rickety wooden desk where she had spent countless hours studying for her nursing exams sat in the exact same corner. Her worn, blue patchwork quilt lay neatly folded at the foot of the narrow mattress. Even the small, cracked ceramic lamp on the nightstand and the specific arrangement of her thick medical textbooks on the shelf were entirely identical to the room she had desperately fled just days ago. A wave of profound, suffocating terror crashed over her. This was not the work of a man offering simple sanctuary. This was the meticulous, obsessive work of a highly dangerous stalker. He had not just brought her to his home. He had completely dissected her life, documented every single private detail, and rebuilt her cage inside his own impenetrable tower. Clara spun around, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Dominic stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the entire frame. He was watching her reaction with a terrifyingly calm, possessive satisfaction. "What is this?" Clara demanded, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. She backed away from him, her shoulder hitting the edge of the wooden desk. "How did you do this? Why would you do this?" "I want you to feel entirely comfortable, Clara," Dominic replied, his deep baritone smooth and completely devoid of guilt. He stepped into the room, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft, final click. "You have experienced a massive emotional upheaval. I thought providing a familiar environment would ease your transition into my world." "Familiar?" Clara shouted, the sheer insanity of the situation shattering her fragile composure. "This is not familiar, Dominic. This is deeply psychotic. You broke into my uncle's house. You took pictures of my most private space. You rebuilt my miserable little room inside a billionaire penthouse. This is sick. You are absolutely out of your mind." Dominic did not flinch at her raised voice. He did not show a single ounce of anger at being insulted in his own territory. Instead, he continued his slow, predatory advance across the bedroom. Clara pressed herself harder against the desk, effectively trapping herself. He stopped mere inches away from her, towering over her trembling frame, completely engulfing her in his dark shadow. Slowly, he raised his large, calloused hand. Clara braced herself, instinctively expecting violence, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. He tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his knuckles lightly grazing her pale cheek. The stark contrast between his lethal reputation in the criminal underworld and this terrifying tenderness made her breath hitch in her throat. "I did not break into the house, my sweet angel," Dominic murmured softly, his dark eyes tracing the delicate lines of her face with absolute, unyielding obsession. "I simply purchased the property from your uncle through a corporate shell company. I had my men dismantle your room, piece by piece, and bring it here. Every book, every blanket, every single memory. Everything that belongs to you now belongs in my house." Clara felt a cold chill slide down her spine. The level of vast resources, time, and obsessive dedication required to execute such an insane task in a matter of days was utterly incomprehensible. "You cannot buy people, Dominic," she whispered, her chest heaving as she stared up into his dark, bottomless eyes. "You cannot buy their lives and lock them away in glass towers. I am a human being. I have a demanding job. I have innocent patients who rely on me. You cannot just erase my independent existence and keep me as a beautiful pet." "I am not erasing your existence," Dominic corrected smoothly, his thumb gently stroking her jawline in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. "I am elevating it. You will never have to work another grueling 14-hour shift. You will never have to worry about paying rent or fearing for your personal safety. You will be completely protected, completely cherished, and completely mine." "I will suffocate in here," Clara fired back, desperately trying to ignore the treacherous, confusing warmth blooming where his rough fingers touched her skin. She pushed his heavy hand away, a completely futile gesture of defiance. "I will go crazy looking at these walls. I will leave. The second you unlock that front door, I will walk right out of this building." A dark, possessive shadow instantly eclipsed the false tenderness in Dominic's eyes. He closed the tiny distance between them, trapping her entirely between his solid, muscular body and the sharp edge of the desk. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, his breath hot and overwhelmingly commanding. "You need to understand your new reality, Clara," Dominic whispered, his voice dropping to a gravelly, lethal octave that brooked absolutely no arguments. "You actively chose to step into my car tonight. You accepted my protection. This is not a hotel, and this is not a temporary living arrangement. You are the beating heart of the Russo family now, and the heart never leaves the body." He pulled back slightly, forcing her to look directly into his unwavering, obsessive gaze. You can fight me," he continued, his tone frighteningly calm and resolute. "You can scream, you can break every piece of wooden furniture in this room, and you can hate me with every fiber of your being. I will gladly accept all your anger. But hear me perfectly clearly. You will never walk out of those elevator doors alone. You will never belong to anyone else on this earth. You are exactly where you are meant to be, and you are never leaving." Despite the suffocating reality of her golden cage, Clara fiercely refused to let her entire identity dissolve into the shadows of the Russo Empire. She demanded to return to her shifts at Chicago General. To her absolute surprise, Dominic did not lock her in the replica bedroom. He granted her permission with a chillingly calm nod, attaching a non-negotiable condition. She would never take a single step outside the penthouse without a heavy security detail. For the next 3 days, Clara moved through the chaotic emergency room with Leo and another massive enforcer standing like silent statues near the swinging double doors. Their lethal presence kept the hospital staff at a terrified distance, isolating Clara even further. Yet, she buried herself in the grueling work, desperately clinging to the only piece of her old life that still made sense. She was checking a supply inventory list in a narrow, dimly lit storage corridor when the lingering scent of stale tobacco and cheap alcohol made her stomach twist violently. Before she could turn around, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, shoving her hard against the metal shelving units. Medical supplies clattered to the linoleum floor. Clara thrashed wildly, her wide eyes adjusting to the dim light to find the grotesque, sweating face of her Uncle Arthur mere inches from hers. He had somehow bypassed the main security checkpoints, likely sneaking in through the basement loading docks he used to service as a delivery driver years ago. His eyes were bloodshot, completely devoid of the cowardly fear he had shown when she fled his house. Instead, they gleamed with a sickening, desperate greed. He slowly removed his hand from her mouth, pressing a thick, dirty finger to his own lips to demand her silence. With his other hand, he pulled a cheap burner phone from his stained jacket pocket and shoved the glowing screen directly into her line of sight. All the air instantly evaporated from Clara's lungs. Staring back at her were high-definition photographs taken through the crack of the bathroom door. They were images of her in the shower, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, taken on that final, terrifying night in his house. Arthur let out a low, raspy chuckle, seeing the sheer horror drain every ounce of color from her pale face. He whispered that he had set up an automated release. If anything happened to him, or if she screamed for those suited monsters guarding the hallway, the photos would be instantly blasted to every doctor, nurse, and major news outlet in Chicago. The immaculate reputation of the brave trauma nurse would be entirely destroyed. Clara trembled so violently her knees threatened to buckle. She asked him what he wanted, her voice a hollow, broken breath. Arthur smiled, revealing stained teeth. He stated that he knew exactly who she was living with now. The entire underworld was whispering about Dominic Russo claiming a beautiful nurse. He demanded $3 million in untraceable cash by the end of the week. If she failed to deliver, the photos would go public, and he would sell the remaining copies to the highest bidder in the dark web trafficking rings. He backed away into the shadows, warning her one last time not to test him, before slipping out the emergency exit door and disappearing into the labyrinth of the hospital basement. Clara collapsed to the cold floor, pulling her knees to her chest as a wave of paralyzing panic washed over her. Her mind raced with terrifying options. The most logical step was to tell Dominic. One word from her, and the Mafia Don would erase Arthur from the face of the earth. But the thought of initiating a cold-blooded murder made Clara physically sick. She was a healer, not an executioner. Furthermore, the toxic echoes of Trent's cruel insults rang loudly in her ears. He had called her a burden, a useless leech. If she went to Dominic begging for $3 million to pay off a blackmail scheme, she would be proving every single accusation right. She would become exactly what she feared, nothing more than a botwoman, completely dependent on the wealth of a criminal to clean up her pathetic messes. She fiercely guarded her last shred of pride and independence. Clara wiped her tears, smoothed down her scrubs, and made a silent, desperate decision. She would figure out a way to handle her uncle herself, completely hiding the extortion from Dominic, entirely unaware that keeping secrets from the most dangerous man in Chicago was a fatal mistake. Clara returned to the penthouse that evening acting like a fragile ghost. She walked past the extravagant furniture with her shoulders hunched, carrying the crushing weight of the extortion entirely on her own. She truly thought her silence was a perfect shield. She was completely wrong. Dominic Russo did not survive the brutal underworld of Chicago by ignoring the microscopic details of his environment. He sat in the deep shadows of the massive living room, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey, tracking her every movement with the terrifying precision of an apex predator. He noticed the violent tremor in her pale hands when she poured a glass of water at the kitchen island. He noticed the way she jumped in pure panic at the slightest sound of the wind against the glass. Most importantly, he noticed she vehemently refused to look him directly in the eyes. When Clara finally retreated to her replica bedroom and locked the heavy oak door, Dominic summoned Leo into his private study. The air in the room grew instantly suffocating. Dominic did not ask his enforcer if there was a problem. He stated it as an absolute fact. He ordered Leo to bypass the hospital security grid immediately. He demanded every second of surveillance footage from the past 12 hours, specifically focusing on the dark blind spots, the service elevators, and the underground loading docks. It took exactly 45 minutes for the Russo network to isolate the anomaly. Leo projected the grainy footage onto the large screen in the study. Dominic watched in absolute, freezing silence as the filthy figure of Arthur cornered Clara in the narrow medical supply corridor. There was no audio recording, but the visual evidence was undeniably clear. Dominic watched the man violently shove a glowing phone into Clara's terrified face. He watched his beautiful nurse collapse to the cold linoleum floor in pure agony after the man walked away. The crystal whiskey glass in Dominic's hand shattered under the immense pressure of his grip, sending shards of glass and amber liquid cascading onto the dark hardwood floor. Someone had dared to threaten his queen. Someone had dared to make her weep in a dirty hallway. Dominic did not scream. He did not issue a loud, chaotic declaration of war. His wrath was a cold, calculating machine. He gave Leo 3 simple directives. Find him. Secure the blackmail material. Erase him. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the operation was executed with terrifying, surgical precision. Arthur was dragged from a cheap, rotting motel room on the far south side of the city. There was no chaotic shootout. There were no desperate screams to wake the neighbors. The highly trained men working for the Russo family moved like silent shadows. They extracted the burner phone from his trembling hands. They brought in a specialized hacker to completely dismantle every cloud storage account, every hidden drive, and every digital footprint associated with the extortion plot. Once the digital threat was permanently neutralized, Arthur was loaded into the back of an unmarked van. He was transported to a private airstrip in the dead of night, placed onto a cargo plane, and banished to a remote, inescapable nightmare far beyond the borders of the country. He was entirely erased from the map, leaving behind absolutely no blood, no body, and no trace of his pathetic existence. The following morning, the penthouse was bathed in bright, unforgiving sunlight. Clara sat at the massive marble kitchen island, her mind completely consumed by a desperate panic. She was calculating impossible ways to secure $3 million without alerting the dangerous man she lived with. She felt sick to her stomach, terrified that her entire life was about to be broadcast to the world. Dominic walked into the kitchen, dressed impeccably in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking completely unbothered. He moved with a slow, lethal grace and stopped right beside her chair. Without saying a single word, he placed a thick, sealed manila envelope on the cold marble counter. Clara stopped breathing. She stared at the envelope, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Dominic calmly poured himself a cup of black coffee. He leaned against the counter, observing her with dark, unwavering eyes. He stated in a smooth, casual tone that she had looked incredibly troubled the night before. He then mentioned that he took the absolute liberty of resolving a minor, lingering nuisance from her past so she could finally sleep peacefully. With trembling fingers, Clara reached out and tore the envelope open. She tipped it over. The cheap burner phone Arthur had used to threaten her slid out onto the marble. It was completely crushed in the center, the screen shattered into 1,000 useless pieces. Beside it lay a single printed flight manifest showing a one-way ticket to a desolate region in South America. Clara gasped, looking up at him in pure shock. Dominic held her gaze, offering a perfectly crafted lie. He explained that her uncle had suddenly realized the grave error of his greedy ways. He told her that Arthur had gladly accepted a highly generous relocation package and had agreed to never set foot in the United States ever again. He assured her that all digital files had been permanently corrected and wiped clean. The threat was entirely gone. Clara stared at the shattered phone. She knew exactly what Dominic was capable of doing to his enemies. The story about a generous relocation package was a beautiful, terrifying lie, spun strictly to keep her delicate conscience entirely clean. Her uncle had not simply accepted money and taken a flight. He had been forcefully and violently disappeared by the monster standing right in front of her. A violent shiver racked her spine. Clara realized the staggering extent of his sugar-coated ruthlessness. He had orchestrated a major kidnapping and possibly a murder, all while she was sleeping just down the hall. He had done it without leaving a single drop of blood for her to see, effectively wrapping his violent darkness around her like an impenetrable shield. She knew she should feel utterly horrified. She knew she should scream at him for crossing the ultimate moral boundary. But as she looked at the crushed device that had held her absolute ruin, the crushing weight of her anxiety completely evaporated. The only emotion that blossomed in her chest as she stared at the ruthless Mafia Don was a deeply profound, incredibly guilty sense of absolute safety. The quiet illusion of safety Clara found in the penthouse shattered exactly 1 week later. Dominic entered her bedroom, his presence commanding and absolute. He informed her that the brief period of isolation was over. He had summoned an entire team of stylists who quickly flooded the penthouse with racks of couture gowns and velvet jewelry boxes. Clara was instructed to prepare for a formal gathering of the Chicago Syndicate. She stared at her reflection in the tall mirror 2 hours later, barely recognizing the woman looking back. She wore a sweeping gown of deep crimson silk that clung to her curves like a second skin, while a brilliant diamond necklace rested heavy against her collarbone. It felt like thick armor. It felt like a permanent brand. The heavily armored limousine carried them to a sprawling historic estate on the edge of the dark lake. The long driveway was packed with luxury vehicles and flanked by men in dark suits carrying concealed weapons. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She was stepping out of her golden cage and walking directly into a den of wolves. Dominic stepped out first, offering his hand. The moment her trembling fingers touched his, he pulled her close, wrapping his strong arm around her waist in a tight grip of absolute possession. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, warning her to keep her head high and let every single person see exactly who she belonged to. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing a breathtaking ballroom dripping in gold chandeliers and suffocating tension. The vast room was filled with the most dangerous and powerful criminals in the city. Conversations died instantly the second Dominic Russo entered. Hundreds of calculating, predatory eyes turned toward the doorway, shifting their dark focus directly onto Clara. They looked at her delicate features and pale skin, searching eagerly for any sign of weakness to exploit. Clara felt the overwhelming urge to shrink away, but the iron warmth of Dominic standing beside her anchored her in place. She remembered the blood and pure chaos of the emergency room. She knew perfectly well how to look death in the face and refuse to blink. She lifted her chin, matching the cold stares of the syndicate with a defiant grace that sent a ripple of surprised murmurs through the silent crowd. Dominic led her through the parting sea of assassins and gang bosses with the lethal elegance of a reigning king. He did not pause to introduce her to anyone. He simply guided her to the main table situated on a slightly raised platform at the far end of the ballroom. It was a throne built explicitly for two. He pulled out the ornate chair for her, waiting respectfully until she was seated before taking his own place beside her. The power dynamic was instantly established. She was not a disposable companion left to mingle in the shadows. She was elevated above them all, placed entirely out of their reach. As the lavish banquet commenced, a massive man with a scarred face approached the main table. He was one of the senior bosses of a rival family. He smiled a cruel, jagged smile, looking Clara up and down with blatant disrespect. He congratulated Dominic on his new title, then casually asked how much money the beautiful little nurse had cost him. The temperature in the ballroom plummeted instantly. Leo and the Russo enforcers instinctively reached inside their tailored jackets. Dominic did not move a single muscle, but his dark eyes turned into bottomless pits of pure murder. Before he could unleash a total bloodbath, Clara placed her slender hand directly over his large clenched fist resting on the white tablecloth. The simple, fearless touch halted the Mafia Don entirely. Clara turned her fierce gaze to the scarred man. She kept her voice perfectly level, a calm and steady tone honed by years of delivering fatal news to grieving families. She told the massive boss that her presence was not a commodity to be purchased, and if he ever spoke to her with such profound disrespect again, he would need an entire team of trauma surgeons to put his jaw back together. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. The scarred boss stared at her in stunned disbelief. Then a low, dark chuckle rumbled from Dominic. The sound was terrifyingly proud. He stood up, picking up his tall crystal glass of champagne. The entire room held its breath. Dominic looked out over the sea of predators, raising his glass in a chilling toast. He declared with lethal finality that the woman sitting beside him was Clara Hayes, his chosen bride and the absolute future queen of the Russo family.